Once again, they're playing games on Capitol Hill, but far different and far more offensive than the games they ordinarily play. Talking about playing games with death. Yeah, it's happening. I doubt their sincerity. Officer Brian Sicknick, we lost him in the aftermath of those terrible riots on January 6th. Well, last night, his remains were positioned in honor under the Capitol Rotunda. An appropriate gesture, of course, but quite late, 27 days after he died. Why the delay? Could it have something to do with the fact that the impeachment trial tied to January 6th is starting early next week? Could that be a factor? I think so. How about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the justice who died in September 18th to be specific? She was granted similar honors. She was not buried until September 29th, 11 days later. She happened to be Jewish, that is, far outside the norms in that religion. What's going on here? Why the delays? Well, that clearly was to complicate things. They wanted to delay it so President Trump would have difficulty getting a successor confirmed. They wanted to stretch out the remembrance of her. Compare it to Jacqueline Kennedy. When she lost her husband, the president, it was on a Friday. He was buried the following Monday. Do you think games might be being played here? I think so. In fact, I know so, and so do you. We all know what it's like to lose family and friends, right? Did you ever wait a month for the funeral? I flew jets in the Marine Corps. Sadly, watching colleagues die happened all too routinely. We lost at least one in this photo. I'm on the far right. We never waited a month before the burial. Something's up. Something's up. We shouldn't be surprised by Congress. All kinds of characters down there. We're going to go through it right now. Everyone's giving Marjorie Taylor Greene a hard time. To me, I'm not ready to go there, but her colleagues, well, let's start with some of them, some of the newer members of Congress. We all know about Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. She has said some deeply offensive things in her life.
CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
Some people did something. That's kind of minimizing the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001, don't you think? Then there's Ayanna Pressley, Democrat of Massachusetts. Here's a beautiful thought that she shared. This is from August of 2020. You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. Keep rioting. Sounds like incitement to me, huh? How about Rashida Tlaib? Have you heard about her? She has fond feelings of one of the worst genocides in human history.
There's a kind of a calming feeling I always tell folks when I think of the Holocaust and the tragedy of the Holocaust and the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land and some lost their lives, their livelihood, the human dignity, their existence in many ways have been wiped out, and some people's passport. I mean, just all of it was in the name of trying to create a safe haven for Jews post the Holocaust.
So as people pile on Marjorie Taylor Greene and they call her a conspiracy theorist, I don't know. Maybe I have a soft spot for certain conspiracies. For instance, we mentioned John F. Kennedy earlier. Do you think that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy by himself? More than half of America thinks there's a lot more to that story. How about President Trump colluding with Russians? That turned out to be a great big conspiracy theory, and CNN was driving one of the greatest conspiracy theories ever. What are they giving Marjorie Taylor Greene a hard time about? Well, you remember David Hogg. He was a young man who attended high school where there was a horrible school shooting and became a very public and very strong advocate for stronger gun control. And he went into the belly of the beast. He went on cable TV. He said provocative things on social media. And when you say stuff like that, there's going to be pushback.
You don't have anything to say for yourself? You can't defend your stance? did you get over 30 appointments with senators? How'd you do that? How did you get major press coverage on this issue? And how did you get kids? Why do you use kids? Why kids?
Okay, so she's following him around, saying things. She's not using profanity. She doesn't violate his personal space. They say, oh, he was just a child. Well, he was 17, and that's an adult in certain states. And he was taking very adult positions on one of the most sensitive topics in our culture right now. I think he could handle it. I think he could handle it just fine. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is being vilified as one of the worst people ever to serve in Congress, while the squad, ooh, they're just beautiful, and they're celebrated by the left-leaning media.
The squad. They get all the press because they're, flamboyant and smart.
I'm an open, fan of the squad. I think they're brilliant. I think they're really changing the party in a great way.
I respect and admire all of the members of the squad.
And the squad really do represent kind of much of the visible leadership of the progressive left.
I love the squad.
Catch that? Brilliant leadership, the most vaguely critical thing, but it was actually praising them. Flamboyant, all right? The squad, they are great. But the squad, in their rhetoric, actively supporting those who oppose law enforcement, and in my opinion, helped lead to the violence over the summer, the anti-cop violence we saw. How hard is it to be a cop, by the way? Thanks to what happened over the summer, being in law enforcement is harder than ever before. Everybody wants to catch a cop doing something wrong, and we all have the tools to catch him. Have you ever noticed that when a police officer shows up on the scene, everybody breaks out their cameras trying to see something, see anything? The wish is to go viral. It's very, very sad for all of us, because crime right now is out of control. At least in New York City, and from what I'm seeing across the country, we have a serious, serious problem with crime. And cops, understandably, are less likely to get involved with all the scrutiny. It's a fact of life. It's a sad fact of life. All right, here's something else you don't hear much of from the left-leaning media. The truth about Joe Biden, even according to the public record. Here he is as president, but what about Joe? The Joe we don't know. I want to show you a picture of Joe, possibly on spring break, back when he was a teenager. There he is, Joe Biden. Well, Joe opened up to an author back in the early 1990s, somebody named Richard Ben Cramer, who wrote one of the iconic books of politics. It's called What It Takes. This guy profiled everybody who was running for president back in 1988. And Joe Biden was one of those. And wow, did Joe Biden open up to this guy a little bit too much? That sounds like Joe, doesn't it? Let's go through some of what he said. This is the story of Joe meeting his first wife's family. Joe was on his best behavior, sure enough, when he met the Hunters, though they couldn't have been nicer. Her mother was a down-to-earth woman, and she was the one who asked Joe what he meant to become. President, Joe answered. For a moment, she just stared. Joe added helpfully, of the United States. One of those guys who thinks he's going to be president when he's 21 years old. Joe also, when he was riding around in his car, would imagine a future successful career in politics. Joe could see the story in the papers day after the vote. He could see the whole thing like it had already happened. They'd wake up and he'd be there, roaring by like a rocket. They'd try to stop him, folks. I guess my opponent kind of took me for granted, took all of us for granted. But he could hear himself say it, 6 hours on the road, his victory speech. You think he was thinking about the people he wanted to serve? He's clearly thinking about himself, fantasizing about himself. Also this, but a hard scrabble upbringing Joe Biden was supposed to have? Well, apparently he had new cars out the wazoo, riding around in the Chevy that Joe Sr., his father, gave him for a present. Joe told his pals he always had a new car in high school, brand new Chrysler 300. Whenever he had a date or something, his dad ran the dealership. Again, I thought this was supposed to be a hard luck family, according to Joe. Let's see, what's this one about? They started hearing stories that Biden broke every record at Delaware. For God's sake, he was the little All-American. The only reason he'd fool with Syracuse intramurals was to get in shape for his tryout with the Baltimore Colts. That's the way he carried himself. If there was an Olympic event in football, Joe said, I'd be in the Olympics. All right, well, consider this. When it was time for Joe to possibly serve in the military, he found a way out. Let's go with that headline, please. It's all right there. Deferment's asthma kept Biden out of Vietnam. Could play football in the Olympics, only if they had an event, but he had asthma. Do you think he was being straight with the draft board about asthma? Joe has been so out of touch for basically his whole life. He was a legend in his own mind, and it's probably gotten worse because Joe's entire adult life has been spent in very special places. Let's go through the timeline of Joe's life. Earned his law degree in 1968 at 25. Elected to the city council 2 years later, and to the U.S. Senate 2 years after that. He's just 29 years old. If you look at the timeline of Joe's life, that means, as an adult, just 2 years was he an average, regular Joe, just a man on the street. 2 years, that's it. So the rest of it, he's recalling glory days, teenager. And by the way, doesn't that look like a bottle of hooch? I'm sorry. Legend has it that Joe never had a drink in his life. Something tells me that that spring break might have been different. Am I giving him a hard time?